Artificial intelligence is remaking marketing as we speak, and if you're a marketer, you can either get up to speed or get left behind. The choice is yours, and really, it's a no-brainer. Join Jeff Livingston and Greg Verdino as they explore the latest AI news, trends, tools, and ideas that are creating the future of marketing today. This is No Brainer, an AI podcast for marketers. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, yes, I am an AI. Take it away, Jeff and Greg.
Hey, this is Greg Verdino, and you are tuned in to No Brainer, the AI podcast for marketers. I'm here with my good friend, Jeff Livingston. How's it going today, Jeff?
Hey, my friend. How are you? Good to see you.
I am doing well. It is good to see you also. So I don't know if you saw, my friend, that I don't know if you're familiar with Feedspot. If you remember the olden days, remember
the old RSS
days?
Right? Woo!
So I got an interesting email this week. Came through to the No Brainer email, the email hotline from
the first one.
Is
that the first one?
I think it was the second. The second or third. The first was something about Romanian women or something, but this one,
or Macedonian listeners that we could buy for 100,000.
This one was from the founder of Feedspot. He just published a list of the top 15 marketing AI podcasts, and guess who's on there, my brother?
We ranked
number 6. Not too bad. We're here in lucky episode 13, and we're already getting some recognition. I think that's a good testament to the hard work you, my friend, put in to make this show everything it is.
It is a team effort, and I am honored to work with you, my bald brother of another mother.
And speaking of team efforts, if you're listening or watching, you're part of the team as well. So please be sure to subscribe, to rate, to review, to like, to share on your favorite podcast service. Or if you're looking at us, our ugly mugs on YouTube, of course, please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, drop us comments, whether you like what we say or not. We are always open to, I would say, constructive criticism, even some unconstructive criticism.
We both have kids. We get that all the time.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. We actually have a packed show today. I'm looking at the show notes. It's about the size of a like some kind of like King James Bible or something. It's massive. We're actually going to do a bunch of things on this show. A lot to share. Our overarching theme is the impact of AI on content marketing. So
100%.
Later in the show, we're actually going to get into some new research from CMI, where they spoke to over 1,000 content marketers about what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, how AI is actually impacting them in their jobs today. But before we do that, we have a few things that we want to get into that we think are important for marketers to understand. The first is how OpenAI is impacting content overall, really. As we're going to get into, there's been some news around how they crawl content and the way they're using a bot to do that, and some new options that are available to limit the access of that bot to your content. We're going to talk about, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What do you do as a marketer? We're also going to take a look at ChatGPT plugins. And that's something that we addressed, I think, maybe in the first or second, maybe third show when plugins first came out. But we want to kind of take a look back. There hasn't been a lot of conversation about the way ChatGPT has deployed plugins and the way brands and media companies are using plugins to become part of that conversational AI experience. So we think it's something that, frankly, marketers might be sleeping on. So we're going to get into that in a little bit as well. So, Jeff, what's the first story we have today? Where do we want to dive in?
So, the first one is really the never-ending onslaught of OpenAI news, right? And I feel like that this could be like Groundhog Day, where we do this every episode, and we try not to, actually. But I do think from a macro standpoint, there are some dynamics in play that are of value. First of all, with ChatGPT being the leading LLM and having 170 million users, depending on your source, obviously it has some great impact. And so when they start putting out dynamics about how content's going to get crawled, and we're going to talk about the web crawling first, obviously, then I think that's impactful to not just them and the people that they serve, but also the content providers across the internet that are getting scraped, as well as the other manufacturers of LLMs who now have to decide whether or not to meet this new ethical level of raised behavior. Although it's slight in nature, it's not an opt-in thing. It's definitely like, you don't want to be crawled, then put this up, similar to Google. In addition to that, I think it creates this overall large conversation that we'll probably get into a little more in depth, is how much is your content worth? And really that's the conversation for a strategic marketer. It's a conversation for any content creator. It's the conversation for anybody that's in the media game. How much is my content worth? Is it valuable enough to gate? Is it something I want to be sharing because of my mission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What am I trying to do with my content? What's the strategy? And how does this change or impact that? And so with that, let's get into it a little bit. I think everybody probably already saw it's a little bit of an old news story now. It's been about 2 or 3 weeks. But, basically there's now GPT bot, which allows you to put in text to block in your robot's text file. And so what OpenAI is trying to do with this, as you know, we've talked about Sarah Silverman, other people that are suing them, is get in front of that, I think. This is, to me, a legal play. We don't want to be sued. We don't want to be held liable. You don't want your stuff crawled. Great. Put this up. I think it also portends that OpenAI is about to do another round of training, and they're going to get a new round of content, right? Like, obviously, if they're using 2021 data and they're putting this out, then hello, welcome to 2023 ChatGPT. So if that happens, there's going to be a lot of discussion. And I think this is basically them saying, you have advanced warning. And I think a lot of publishers are going to react to that and put up gated text. They're going to put up the robot's text file blocking. They're going to diversify their content. And I think there's large implications, good, bad, and ugly, which we will get into a little bit, playing off a blog I did. But what are your thoughts on it before we get there?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting, right? Because first of all, we're seeing this move from OpenAI. Of course, they are the first mover in response to, well, I think, as you said, a lot of these challenges to their sort of integration of copyrighted material, other organizations' intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, into their training data set. But, of course, every single large language model is training on effectively the same data. I mean, maybe not exactly, kind of word for word the same data, but, most of these large language models were trained originally on this
common crawl, right?
The pile, right? This common crawl, right? It includes common crawl.
Yeah.
It includes a file or a database called, or data set called Books3, right? Which has hundreds of thousands of books illegally ingested, right? That's where, like, nobody went to the library, scanned in Sarah Silverman's book, and
I know your book's in there.
Sure. It doesn't know what my book says, because if I ask the questions, it always comes out with some kind of gobbledygook that has nothing to do with anything I wrote in the book. But it does know I wrote the book, and it does have a couple of the key themes. So I know the book is in there. I'm sure your book is in there. Any book that's been published by a major publisher.
I queried my book. I said, tell me about Now It's Gone. It said 5 cents on eBay.
Yeah. So, like these, so you've got these massive data sets that everybody is using. And to your point now, of course, now any of these large language models need to find new sources of data. We're already seeing common sources of data kind of start to throttle, Twitter especially, or X, whatever the hell it's called, throttled, especially in light of the fact that Elon is trying to build his own AI, but they throttled their fire hose so that it couldn't be so easily scraped, providing all that access to all that, that rich, sweet Twitter data. I don't know why, of all things, you'd
Twitter,
want to scrape that, right? But Reddit has done the same kind of thing, where they've throttled their fire hose, and they're expecting to be paid by anybody that wants to use the data to train an AI. So we're already seeing people kind of shut the gates a little bit.
Right.
So a move like this certainly makes it easier for anyone to make that decision, assuming you're paying enough attention and you know what to do and how to do it. Because
Right.
to your point, this is not exactly an informed consent move. This is not opt in. This is opt out. And many people, frankly, don't know what to do, how to do it, aren't even aware this is going on.
And it's pretty easy to do.
It is easy to do unless perhaps you're, on, let's say, a common platform,
right,
where you don't have the ability to go in, like a Medium, for example,
or
and change the
Squarespace
robot
even,
text, or a Squarespace or whatever.
Yeah. And the other thing with it too is, I mean, frankly, if OpenAI wasn't so hot with its news, I don't think it would have been picked up. Like, I don't think they actively promoted it. They haven't been really vociferous about it. They haven't gone on their usual Sam Altman PR tour about it.
Right.
It's just that if they sneeze, everybody talks about it now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's going to have some interesting implications, as and I'm sure we'll get into this as you do Good, Bad, Ugly, right? Where, I think it's going to have some very interesting implications for what the future, the current, however you want to think about it, training data set looks like. Because we're already, and I know we're going to get into this, we're already seeing major media companies implement the code to block the GPT-bot.
Oh, 100%.
Right? So right away. Now, on the flip side, you've got organizations like, I guess it was the AP that did a deal with OpenAI to give them full access to all of their archive of information. And of course, that's a good, reliable source. But at the same time, if a New York Times or a Washington Post or a whomever decides to throttle or to block the bot or whatever, that starts to raise some questions about, whether or not the next round of training is going to be as reliable, as effective, produce as high a quality output, and so on and so forth.
Right. And that's definitely part of the bat. I mean, I would say maybe the ugly, depending on your point of view. But however you want to say it, it's not great, and what we've constantly heard throughout the community and expressions from other people is that, is this going to be something where ChatGPT generated content starts feeding ChatGPT? More likely, these LLMs are going to start sourcing themselves completely unconsciously, because there's a lot of people that are out there that are publishing content that they've created with an LLM, either through one of the large language models directly or through a secondary source, like a writer or a Jasper or a Copy AI or whatever. I mean, it seems like everybody and their mother has got software, slapped a GPT implementation or an LLM implementation, and say, "Hey, we've got AI."
Right.
Yes and no, but the reality is that with that much content getting proliferated on the internet, you got a lot of crap. There's a lot of crap. We've talked about this raising the bottom. Well, the bottom's raised, but now the bottom's going to feed itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Already, just look at, I don't know if you've seen, there have been so many stories, even over the course of the past couple of weeks, of mainstream media articles, online articles that are clearly AI written, with, in some cases, with what appears to be a limited amount of human intervention and interaction and editing. The one that kind of, blew up a little bit over the course of the past week was it was, I believe, an MSN article, which clearly used, an OpenAI, LLM, to produce. And you were just in Canada, but this was a list of, for people who didn't see the story, a list, sort of a travel plan, like a 1-day things to see if you're visiting Montreal. And it highlighted the food bank as a place to go for dinner or something.
Saw that.
And it even said, be sure to show up hungry. And it was so bizarre and inappropriate. And I don't understand how any publication with an editorial board of any kind wouldn't have caught that. So that this basically went straight from the LLM, straight from the AI, directly onto the website without a single person taking a look. And it had a picture of the food bank and everything. So, it was a pretty robust execution with the with the sort of the exception of there was no human in the loop, or if there was a human in the loop, they didn't care or thought
And
it might be funny or something. But it
it's
was
a great example of contextual error, right? I mean, because from an LLM standpoint, this is a place you can get food, right? It's probably very highly ranked because it's an impactful charity in the area, right? And so it's like, this is great. It's wonderful. People like it. There's more ratings than any other restaurant in that area. We're totally going to put it on there. Like from the logic of an algorithm, it makes total sense. But this indirectly, I always hear from people like, "Oh, it might take my job," or we have a little bit of an existential crisis with this. Like, you have not used this because when you see things like that, that's when you know, like, this really is not intelligent. It's just an algorithm, and it just supports the whole need for having humans in the loop. But again, shame on brands and people and bosses that are saying like, man, I'm going to replace this person with an AI. Well, good luck with that, because that's what you're going to get at the food bank.
Anyway, I'm dragging us way off topic, so let's get into some of the implications.
You served me up a rant ball there.
Sorry. Let's get into some of the implications, I guess, around what.
Yeah, let's talk good first, right? Like, why is this good? Okay, and maybe let's talk about a food bank, even as an example, as a nonprofit, just playing off of that. Like, all jokes aside, if I'm a food bank and I want to, tell and educate the marketplace about how, not every one of our customers is homeless. Far from it. There are a lot of people that actually rely on food banks to get through their week. Impoverished people, how many Americans are in poverty, how this can change somebody's life, how just a regular donation every month can be just incredibly impactful. Like the kind of things that, like, if you're into nonprofits, if you're into giving and that kind of community work, you already know about, but the rest of us don't. Right? Maybe you want to have that content populated in GPT. So 100%, all that content you've created, you want your site scraped, and you don't really care whether or not GPT gives you credit or not. Your job is to educate. It's advocacy. It's education. It's public information. It's all those things wrapped up in one beautiful website. And why wouldn't you have it sourced, right? And so to me, I think like, NGOs and advocacy groups probably don't care about the GPTbot unless they're profiting off their content in some way. The other group too that I can easily see saying, I don't care, is businesses. I mean, particularly if you have a very strong point of view that you want to dominate the marketplace, right? Like, let's go back to the old Microsoft Macintosh wars about which type of PC is better, why, the whole religious, war that occurred with operating systems. You can see it even with Android and OS to this day. I mean, come on, man. Of course I want my information populated in there about why my technology is better, right? And I don't care whether you source me or not. Just source it, please.
Right. And that's the thing, right? A lot of businesses, especially B2B marketers, right?
Yes.
They want to prime the marketplace by shaping the way decision makers think about topics that are related to the product or service or platform that they provide, right? So if you're, I don't know, let's say an ABM provider, you want the narrative around ABM to, as closely as possible, match your solution to deliver ABM services to clients. I'm just using ABM as an example, right?
100%.
So if a marketer is trying to learn about ABM and they turn to a decision engine or whatever, a ChatGPT, a Bing, or whatever, and they say, tell me about ABM, right? And they prompt and they're looking to learn. The closer that narrative matches what that buyer is ultimately going to find when they hit your website, the better that is for you, right? Because they will be primed to think the way your brand wants them to think. So 100%, I would say a vast majority of marketers are going to want to get their information out there. And we say, if you don't care about whether or not you get sourced or cited, and of course that is true, but at the same time, if you write in a way, as many brands do, that kind of inextricably links your brand name or product name to that narrative, ultimately, in some way, shape, or form, your brand name or product name is going to come out in that narrative as it's presented by a conversational AI. It's kind of like if you're Coca-Cola, and I know that's B2C, obviously, but if you're Coca-Cola and you want every time somebody asks a chatbot about happiness, the chatbot responds and says, Coca-Cola, happiness, right? You want that. That's phenomenal, right? So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, as a content marketer working for an enterprise, a brand, to get your point of view into the training data in a way that actually does exactly what you want your content marketing to do, which is put you on the radar.
I can even see enterprises and industries setting up, and this happens all the time, but fake organizations to generate content and populate the web so it gets sourced into this as well as Google. For example, Disney, hypothetically, would want to do that about LGBTQ plus trans rights in Florida, right? Or in other places based on what they're facing. So, I mean, there's a whole gamut of companies that want to do it. And this is one of these types of conversations where I think people really need to separate themselves from their own internal repulsion against AI, which is this kind of ethical backlash that we see all the time with content marketers ranting on the LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever. Is Thread still around, or is it dead yet?
I hear they're launching a web version now.
Oh, so old people like us can use it. Good. So anyway, all jokes aside, I mean, like wherever people are talking about this, you see it all the time. But if you're an executive, you're thinking about this differently. You're thinking about, do I want my content propagated? What's the value? And I think what OpenAI is trying to do is provide a platform. And if you look at it like that, to get your ideas out into the marketplace, there's value. So that's the good. Yes?
100% agree.
Okay, let's talk about the bad. Now, if you're an individual content provider, let's say influencer du jour on topic A, and you've become pretty well known, you're making money off of it, but now your content's going to get indexed. Do you decide to gate it? I mean, can you afford to gate it as an individual content provider?
And I think for someone like that, an influencer, sort of a micro creator, for lack of a better term, one person media company, I think it's actually it's a gray area, right? Because you don't want to lose control over your IP. You don't want your ideas to become essentially, kind of Creative Commons, for lack of a better analogy. But at the same time, you do want your ideas out there. You do want your name spread. You do want to grow your reputation. And it's still, TBD in a lot of ways whether this is an effective way to do this for an individual. I mean, I know as an individual, maybe I'm just an asshole, but
no.
but when I certainly asked ChatGPT about myself, right? And I would have felt really, really lame if after 20 years of doing this and writing books and giving speeches and doing interviews and writing articles and all this other stuff, if ChatGPT was like, hey, there's no such person as Greg Verdino. Can you give us an idea of what you're talking about?
Right. Let's say your shades are right. Okay, she's got like I'm looking at her right now, okay? She's got 2 million, I pulled this up while you're talking, 2 million people on Instagram. She's a workplace expert. She gets hired by LinkedIn now to do these how to succeed at your job things. I don't think she's ever really worked in a long enterprise experience, so I don't know if she's like the classic influencer, right? She's put in probably about 10, 15 years into this now. So in my mind, she's somebody that would be a classic. To your point, do I want to give in and let them scrape me and let my ideas become part of this? Or am I so valuable now that you have to come to the shade channel? or Sade. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I'm sorry. Sarai. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
And I love her stuff, by the way. So that's why I'm highlighting her. But
yeah. Now, I would contrast somebody like that with a mainstream media outlet who has a very specific sort of 1-2 punch revenue model, right?
Right.
Either you subscribe to their content and it's both, right?
Sports Business Journal. Let's use that.
They've got subscription revenue and they've got advertising revenue, both of which are contingent upon their ability to get people to their website.
And conferences and events.
Well, sure. And then you've got those things as well. But even just the core two models. And then you can probably even add branded content as a secondary model, right? But all of these things are contingent upon producing information that you can only get from them, content you can only get from them, that you're either willing to pay for, or when you come to get it for free, an advertiser is willing to pay for your eyeballs. Now, in a scenario where a conversational AI summarizes the information, or a search engine provides you with a narrative style response to your query rather than directing you out to a long list of blue links, that becomes a real challenge to the core business model of the entire media and entertainment industry. And that's where I think it gets really interesting and where it gets into the bad and, of course, some of the ugly too, right?
Right. Yeah, we're in the bad now. And I think the content writers, the Writers Guild, if you would, in Hollywood, I mean, they're spot on. I mean, good for them for staying in the fight as long as they have. Being out of work for 4 months is not a joke, right?
Right.
And so they're fighting this battle for their lives right now, and they're right to do it.
Yeah, and they're right. And
it's now or never.
Yeah, and they're kind of the canaries in the coal mine in a way, because that's an industry that very quickly kind of bought into the leadership in the industry, very quickly bought into the narrative that artificial intelligence can do the same work these humans do faster, more efficiently at a higher scale and volume, and we don't need people. Now, it's pretty clear when you look at, per our example of MSN, it's pretty clear what happens when you just let a machine go ahead and do the writing. And that's a relatively easy thing, right? To create a one-day itinerary for a destination city, put a couple of rules in place and have somebody look at it quickly and say, hey, a food bank is not a 4-star restaurant. But imagine a world where writers are disintermediated and, machines are writing, plots and scripts and advertisements and stuff. It's going to be creative chaos. But the other thing is, as you think about the sort of the bad, and this is where we're seeing kind of the rubber hit the road around this sort of robots text, is if you look at New York Times, and I mentioned New York Times already earlier, that a few days ago it came out that they had updated their terms of service, where in a very public way on the website in their terms it says that you're prohibited from using any New York Times published material to train an artificial intelligence. Then obviously it became clear that they had implemented the robots text that blocks GPTbot, right?
Sure.
So they are now actively blocking OpenAI from scraping their data.
But not the others.
Right.
Although if they're smart, they probably block Common Crawl
they probably,
as well.
I mean, their terms and conditions sort of de facto, at least on paper, so to speak, block the others. But,
which gives them a right to sue, which
then leads to the next thing, right? They're still talking about suing.
Yeah.
And, some of the reporting, has talked about things like looking for damages in excess of $150,000 per instance that they can prove their IP was infringed upon.
It's going to be really hard to prove, man.
Very hard to prove.
Very hard to prove.
Very hard to prove, although they can certainly see when they're scraped.
Well, the other problem, though, is like who else is scraping them? And was that scraped article sourced? I mean, so there's a lot of plausible deniability.
Very hard. It can be very hard to prove. But, all it takes is a judge to say that, in order to avoid any confusion and any ambiguity about this, ChatGPT, you need to wipe your model and start over. Which
may be what's happening anyway, right?
Right. Which might be what happens anyway. But that's huge, right? Think about
100%.
how expensive that is and how disruptive that is.
Massive cost. Because we're get diving in. Let me just finish up with a couple more ramifications on the bad. If you do want to protect your content, it's going to cost you, right? It's going to cost you in a couple ways. It's going to cost you developer time, which might be relatively easy. If you have a savvy developer, just slap it in the robot's text. Yep. But then, just your example there, we have to hire a lawyer. Or if I'm an individual, this could be a huge pain in the butt, right? This could be a really nightmare for the small entrepreneur. And in addition to that, I think the other issue is, let's say I want to divide my content. Strategically speaking, there's a lot of organizations who want to do that. For example, a trade association. You're a trade association, you want some of your advocacy stuff out there, 100% right. But then there's all your member content, and you're going to want to block that. And, it's already gated, but if it's not gated, you're going to want to block it. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden you're in a huge data cleanup job that's been forced upon you by OpenAI. What's accessible, what's not, and you have to parse that into two different directories. And moving forward, you will always have to do that. So that's a governance issue. Let's go into the ugly. We talked about the quality of the content going down because you have crap content and more people gating and blocking. I think that there's a brand issue that's going to happen for OpenAI. I don't know if it's a long-term one, but there's going to be anger about content getting crawled or being forced to put this kind of blocker in, because you're basically taking my copyrighted content for free anyway and imposing this upon me because my site's public. Mm-hmm. Just because I'm public doesn't mean my content's not copyrighted, right? Like I have a ton of photos on Flickr that are copyrighted. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to steal them. Steal them all the time.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's huge. And then finally, I think there are concerns about entities feeding GPT misinformation.
Of course.
And that's a huge issue with the larger internet right now, and content marketing and political advocacy and just people lying to other people, and where that's pharmas and fentanyl. I mean, that's an obvious one.
That's the irony here, right? Is that, it'll be organizations like the New York Times or NBC or MSN,
anti-vaxxers,
right? Who will? But it's the sort of the legitimate authoritative sources, so to speak, who are going to be most concerned about being scraped, who will then implement the code to avoid being scraped. Ain't nobody who's interested in distributing misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, conspiracy theories. None of those guys are going to be implementing this code. They want to be scraped. They want to get into the engine. They want to be part of the training set. They want to poison the well.
Right.
And this is an amazing way for them to poison the well at speed and scale like never before.
Right. And then also GPT, I know it won't get this bad, ChatGPT becomes a QAnon cesspool. I mean, that would be like the worst thing possible, right? But that is kind of the dystopian.
Right. That is a possibility, right? Especially as you pointed out before, the model starts to feed on itself, right? You're training future LLMs on the output of today's LLMs. And for every problem you might see in an LLM today in terms of its reliability, its accuracy, its ability to confabulate, hallucinate, that kind of stuff, how does that get amplified in a future where that information and content created using that data set becomes the content in the future data set? It's interesting times. I mean, that's for sure.
My prediction, my friend, is that Elon's LLM will be the cesspool.
The truth pool. That's a fairly safe prediction.
The truth pool. All right, let's move on to this plugin stuff because I think it can be relatively quick. But I do think that people have kind of slept on the plugin market, to your comments earlier. I think that's the accurate way to look at it, because there are only 1,000 plugins plus right now. I actually have spent some probably inappropriate amount of time just literally looking at all the plugins. I've literally scanned them all in the past 5-6 days, just trying to get a feel for them, trying to understand which ones are popular, which ones aren't, why. There are a lot of little AI bots playing off of it, which I think is the developer community just screwing around with this. But there are some brands and associations that are using the bots to basically create their own plugin, ChatGPT, and we've talked about some of them like Kayak, OpenTable. I actually planned some restauranting during the Chicago Marathon using the ChatGPT plugin on OpenTable. But you could also research NASA images. I know abortion is a polarizing issue, but if you are on the pro-choice camp, there's an app there that will help people find places to go. So there's an association using it. On and on and on and on. There's examples of people that have thought to put their content in there in a branded way. Banking is another one. And I think this is actually something that's an opportunity. And why I say that is because, first of all, ChatGPT is up to 170 million, right? And if it's up to 170 million, then you have to think that at least, I believe, probably 10 million, 15 million people have the pro version. I mean, roughly it's between 1% and 10% on these.
Figure 7% or so are paying for plus, right?
Yeah, and I think most of it are the educated tech users and writers and businesses that think they're protecting their data by putting it in a plus version. And the reality is that when they do that, it's good, but they also have access to these toys, these plugins.
Yeah.
And I think that when you start looking at 7 million people, that's an interesting audience. And they're the early technology adopters, which we know are a highly valuable audience. Usually people that have high income for a company like Kayak or the like, then there's a revenue opportunity. If you're a B2B tech play, there might be a revenue opportunity there. So as this grows, this becomes more and more of a place to provide that. And then and I can see this happening, if the LLM market becomes more competitive, I can easily see OpenAI opening this and just making it available as a value add. And then also the floodgates are open, right?
And I would also expect that the other chat providers are going to offer comparable services, assuming it's popular, right? Not everybody maybe, but there's no reason why there wouldn't be an app store for Claude, the same way there's an app store for ChatGPT, or an app store that kind of gets attached to Llama implementations or whatever. It's still very early. As you said, there's not a lot of organizations who have kind of taken the call to action and built these things. So there's a relatively small pool of apps that are in play. A lot of them are clunky and kludgy. Like, I don't know that I get a ton of value out of all the ones I've tried. Some are really cool, provide good usability. A lot of them aren't. But I'm thinking back to
the graphics ones are terrible.
Are they bad? But I mean, even like sometimes you're like, I don't know, like, there are some that, will read a PDF for you or will scour the web, because OpenAI had to throttle their own web browsing, which then led to this whole GPTbot, which led to the whole, you can now opt out of the GPTbot. But there are third-party plugins that allow you to browse the web in real time that works really well. The ones that will kind of scour a PDF are kind of clunky. You have to go to a third-party site, you have to put the PDF in, then you have to punch a code into ChatGPT, letting it know your PDF has been scanned. Like, by that point, I could have read the PDF. But, so it's still relatively early, but I'm thinking about, I don't know if you remember the early days of the iTunes, the App Store for the iPhone.
Totally
right?
Parallel.
You remember one of the earliest, most popular apps? There was this, it was a stupid app of the koi
crayon
pond
app?
What was that? It was the koi pond. I don't know if you remember
yeah.
that, where it was like you were just fish swimming on your screen, and you could put your finger and make ripples in the water, and the fish would kind of swim around the ripples. And it was so stupid, but so popular.
Those
But
were the days.
but it gave you a sense of how this device was different.
Yes.
And the same is happening right now, largely under the radar, to your point, and I guess my point earlier too. It gives you a sense of the kinds of things that are possible inside that chat box that would allow a brand to have greater control over how their information is presented. It's presented in a way that is inextricably tied to the brand, right? The Kayak plugin is the Kayak plugin. It's got the brand name, it uses the logo, and the Expedia plugin is the Expedia plugin, and the Open Table is Open Table, Instacart is Instacart. There is no ambiguity as to where the information comes from,
It's great
as
from
to
a
what
brand
you're
perspective.
using as a consumer. I mean, it's almost like a dream implementation for a lot of brands, for a
I mean,
lot of different use cases.
can I just say it's shocking to me that OpenAI hasn't opened this to the entire
Right. That's a whole
GPT? I
separate
think it's a
story.
strategic fail on their part. I
I mean,
think it would actually accelerate adoption.
it could be an issue around scaling it, or it could be an issue around a lot of these apps not being
It's
ready
the
for prime
calls.
time
It's the
costs,
API
or
calls. They don't want to
right.
pay for it. It's
Yeah.
like, come
And they're
on,
not
dude. You're
making
being penny
right.
wise and pound foolish.
And they're not
Go.
making money off of it yet, right? They haven't figured out what that model is, like the Apple skim 10 cents off the dollar kind of model.
Right. But
But
figure it out, man. Get this thing out there. Or don't figure it out. Get it out there. Get a ton of people in there using it. And then do the classic meta move and like
right.
punch people in the head with the price after, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so freaking Zuck. uh, okay, I think that's good. I don't think we need to talk anymore about that one. It's a good opportunity if you have the guts to do it and you're willing to experiment a little. I think I would totally do it if I had discretionary money and I was a consumer brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even know that it's that expensive to build. You just need to
No,
have a developer who knows how to do it and write to the API, basically.
containerize it and see
Yeah.
you later.
Yeah. So since we're talking about things that aren't that expensive, that kind of, I guess, leads us to a point where we should take a commercial break and throw a little bit of love at our sponsors. So we'll be back with with our next topic, the CMI Content Marketer Research, right after this break.
Hey, everybody, we're back. I'm going to punt this over to my friend Greg, who did all the homework on the Content Marketing Institute career and salary outlook for 2024. We'll be sure to post a link in the show notes. But it does have some interesting discussion of AI. You want to pick it up, my man?
Absolutely. So, not surprisingly, even though it is a fairly broad study and it looks at things like salaries and whether people are engaged in their work and job hopping and crap like that, there is obviously a very strong undercurrent of AI and what does AI mean for content marketers. And even I think in a lot of ways, there's some specific questions about AI and how content marketers are feeling about AI, but I think the way content marketers are feeling about AI and the way they're using AI today, I think is shaping a lot of their perspectives on the future of their careers, their jobs, the industry, where it's all going. So I think it's worth discussing some of the key findings that are specific to AI. So I'm sure you would be shocked, I tell you, Jeffrey, to learn that a majority of content marketers are in fact using AI in their work today. I'll throw some of the numbers around. When you look at what they're using it for, I would say roughly half are using it for things like, for those of you who aren't seeing what I'm seeing right now, those of you listening to the podcast,
Now you know I
Jeff's
work from home.
Jeff's cat just made a guest appearance. Jeff's cat and Jeff's cat's butthole have made a guest appearance on the podcast. You definitely want to check this out on YouTube. This will be in the blooper reel for sure.
I think that one actually we should keep in the pod and make that our clip for the week to launch it. Craziness and shenanigans on the No Brainer podcast.
Love it. So speaking of cat buttholes, 47% of content marketers say they're using AI tools for brainstorming. About the same, 46 saying they're using it to come up with headlines or do keyword research, things like that. Interestingly enough, and this gets to, I think, one of the running themes we've had through this show, only 36% say they're actually using these tools to write. And I think what you're seeing here is people who are skilled professional writers recognizing the shortcomings of today's generative AI tools and recognizing they can do lots of things. They can edit, they can help us come up with great titles, they can optimize our posts, they can streamline our copy, they can proofread for us. They can't come up with a great, super powerful on-brand narrative. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. Interestingly, though, and I thought this was actually really was surprising, was that 25% of content marketers say that they are not using AI at all. What do you make of that?
25% of content marketers are going to be in a new career in 2 years.
Right?
I mean, if they keep that up, they're out.
Right. I mean, whether you love it or not, and whether you're using it to actually do your writing for you. And I don't use it to do my writing for me either, but I use it every single day for every single asset I create, whether it's to rewrite or summarize or find highlights or come up with headline ideas or tell me whether or not I use keywords, right?
Yep. I use it to version, like I'll write the original campaign copy and then version it out accordingly with it. I mean, I think it's great for that. In fact, I even did that with some of our show notes today.
Absolutely.
And that good, bad, and ugly thing. It was very easy to do.
Yep,
but 100% right. I mean, I think anybody, that's why I get really annoyed with people who are saying it's going to take my job. I'm like, you're not using it. You're really not using it. And I could tell right away by you saying that. You're just prejudiced. I mean, I have a friend on, and that is the word for it. You're prejudiced. I mean, I have a friend on Facebook that rants on every single post that we put out there. And I've taken an attitude about this, Greg, where I'm going to be a lot more conciliatory and educational about it and just try to pull people along because I realize that people have this mortal fear about it, this existential fear. Thank you, all of you sensational media pubs that have reported on it to that point. But, it's sad. You're going to see these people complain about it, not use it, and then complain about losing their job because they never embraced it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, you see it with, really, with other forms of generative AI you use, like, for like things that are baked into the Adobe suite or whatever, if you're editing photography or whatever, it's like these tools are tools, right? It's like, how do you not avail yourself of the full variety of tools that you have to make your job potentially easier? And I'm not saying you have to buy into the use of Gen I for every possible application anyone could think of. It's this miracle drug. But if you're not at least trying it, and it's free or practically free to do so, to determine where in your workflow it might help you, I feel like you're going to end up at a significant, substantial disadvantage relative to others. But that's not really what this study is about per se, and I'm not trying to go too far down that rabbit hole.
It is notable. I mean, it is notable to see 25% using it, and I totally think it is notable too to also see that of those using it, only 36 are actually writing original content with it, quote unquote original.
Yeah, and it's notable, but to me not surprising, because if you've spent any time using it as a writer, not a writing assistant, and you have any benchmark for what good content should and could look like, and any standards about narrative and word choice and structure and voice and tone and all of that stuff, you do very quickly come to learn that it's not going to give you anything near the kind of work product you would get from an expert writer or an expert editor. But it certainly is very useful, right? And it can take on a lot of the tasks that are time consuming but not particularly high value.
Right, but it is a good segue to your next point, which is the fear of losing jobs. Like we just talked about that, or losing value or being worked to death, that kind of thing. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, even though the majority of content marketers report that they are in fact using these tools, they are concerned about the way these tools might impact them in their jobs and might also impact the longevity and their career paths and things like that. So some of the stats that I pulled from the report is that 62% worry that they will be less respected, or there will be less respect for skilled writers and editors in their organizations. Now, I can say this first and second hand. A lot of organizations don't respect those people to begin with. They think it's an easy job. Oh, anybody can write. And content marketers do tend to be kind of looked upon in certain organizations as like the bottom of the heap. It's a training role or a transitional role. And I don't believe that, of course.
Just been there, done that.
Right. But 62% are worried that to whatever extent content marketers are, are not highly respected, or their skill set is not highly respected in many organizations, that's only going to get worse. They worry, 55% worry that the jobs of writing and editing will become commoditized. 45% are worried that there's going to be lower compensation for fewer jobs. So they assume job loss, probably replaced with lesser skilled writers. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, all of this is not about the technology. It's about the leaders inside organizations who have been sold the narrative that this technology allows you to produce human caliber output without the cost of all those pesky humans.
I was just having this conversation with a fellow startup exec, and we were talking today about how when we get into companies and we start selling AI, the mid-level manager is usually the one that torpedoes a deal. The executive is all like, let's do this. This is great. And then the mid-level one's like, I already do this work. I don't want to see this in here. Basically coming up with barriers. So one of the reasons for that is that they're fearful, particularly the way executives talk about this. Oh, we'll be so much more productive. We'll get 80 times more work. We'll be so much more profitable. Maybe we'll be able to reduce headcount long-term. Like, they're just not being sensitive at all to the workplace. And, when you do that, what you're creating is an opportunity to really sow dissatisfaction and lose people. But I do think for every one of those articles where you see, like, remember that Washington Post article where like 3 or 4 guys lost their job because their boss implemented ChatGPT? You're never going to see the follow-up article where that executive loses his job because he's an idiot to replace his staff with ChatGPT.
Right. That's the funny thing, is that these executives who are looking to use AI to save money on headcount, they think, I don't know if they're thinking this way, but the implication seems to be that they're commoditizing the job of the creator, right? The marketer, the writer, the photographer, the videographer, the editor, whatever. But what they end up learning over the longer haul is, because they're putting into the marketplace more generic pap, they're actually commoditizing their own product, their brand, their company, and that's where it comes back to bite them. And they end up that person ends up being part of the fallout, but not for the reason that we're all talking about.
Right. No, and you need more value, right? You need somebody to guide the value to ensure the quality is there, that the creativity is there.
Yeah,
I think maybe another way to look at it too is like if you look at SDRs, sales development reps, right? I would say probably the bottom third of them are probably in trouble right now, right? Like, if I'm an SDR and I'm not producing, okay, then this comes along and my top third are now producing 5 times as much because they have, like, basically, power drills to go out and find more contacts on Success or whatever. I mean, yeah, that's true. You'll probably lose your job because of AI, but weren't you going to lose your job anyway because you were underproducing?
In that scenario, the bottom third of SDRs are probably on the chopping block anyway, right?
Right. So you got to look at it like that. If you're going to lose your job because AI is, like, basically empowering other people to produce more content or better content than what you produce, are you in the top producers? Are you lagging? Are you kind of falling behind? Look, this happens. Like, when I had my kid too, like, man, and my wife went back to work and I was at home, I was actually like working 30 or 35 hours a week. Maybe I was getting lapped a little bit. I don't know. I mean, people get lapped, people have things happen, life events happen, parents die, kids happen, everything happens. So yeah, it's possible that the bottom part of the market does drop out in certain areas.
I think you also need to be smart if you're in a career. I mean, probably any area of marketing, but particularly since we're talking about content marketers. Excuse me. If you're a content marketer and I don't want to denigrate the work anyone is doing, but if you've chosen to focus on the bottom end of the content creation spectrum,
Cheap blogs.
You're primarily doing cheap blogs, or you're primarily doing social posts, that can
email
easily
marketing
be generated with an AI. Now is the time not just to upskill around artificial intelligence, how do I use these tools, but to level up the kind of work you're doing. There's
100%.
no reason, let's say you're a great writer and you're churning out hundreds of cheap blogs a week. You could just as easily be churning out 2 high-level, meaty thought leadership white papers for the same client per month, right? And that's the kind of stuff that is much, much harder to commoditize.
Yeah, I do think the one area where I see this being impactful, just to get to people worrying about getting commoditized, are to some extent, particularly the larger agencies that don't have specialties. You know what I mean? I think smaller boutique agencies that have specialties, like usually, like you're a content marketer, right? You do great work, but does every office of Ogilvy do great content marketing work?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Right.
they're in trouble, man.
That's potentially the generalist potentially is a challenge. And, there have even been, I've seen a number of articles lately, and they make perfect sense about how, it's not just, I think we've come out without actually saying the term in this episode, and we know over many episodes, we are firm believers in having a human in the loop. When it comes to content marketing, it's not just any old human either. You kind of need an
strategist.
Right. You need an expert in the loop, right? Whether that's an expert strategist, a subject matter expert. You need someone who can, not just prompt an AI and come out with a standard 5-paragraph article, but somebody who knows, is this article BS? Where are the facts? How do I find the facts? Who do I source? Is this authoritative? Is this meaningful? Does my audience care, right? All of these things that require deep and really substantial expertise that is really the stock and trade of a good marketer and certainly a good content marketer. A couple of other things I want to just share very quickly with all of this as backdrop, and it's all relevant, not surprisingly. The majority of content marketers want upskilling. Like nearly all of them, they want to be trained on AI. They want to learn data science. They want to learn at least the fundamentals, the basics of machine learning.
It's fun too, I think.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think the number 3 thing on the top most desired upskills was leadership. So you're starting to see there like a recognition, right? A recognition that, we need these soft skills. It's not just about being a great writer and understanding AI. It's about leveling up our human soft skills that allow us to be more adaptable and more valuable and more flexible in the workplace, which kind of relates to the last thing that you kind of teased there a little bit, which is, interestingly enough, the majority of the people who were surveyed love their jobs. They feel engaged in their work. They like doing content. They like the place they work. And I've seen this as well, find that in any given organization, there's no clear career path for the content marketer, right?
Totally agree with that.
Right. And without a clear career path, that puts these people on the market all the time. Right. And that's where if you have the skills, you have an opportunity now to level up and do interesting, more strategic work. If you don't have the skills and you don't know the tools, you're going to find yourself taking a lesser job for lesser pay because you've been to at least some extent disintermediated by the machine, or more likely the man who disintermediated you with a machine.
Or worse, you age out. Right.
Right.
I mean, like that's something that a lot of people in this career path face, is that the younger generation comes up and they're more affordable for roughly the same job.
Right.
And, I mean, to be candid, this is something that I faced. Not the ageism, but like I hit the apex of my career path and there was no movement out of my job. So when you're in that place, you're basically in a gig. It's the terms are a little different, right? You're getting the benefits, everything, but you're in a gig. It's a gig economy. And then, you have to decide how much longer you want to do the gig or when you're ready for the next gig, because this one's boring. You're never going to get something that new. And I can see a lot there, and I identify with that. But I would also say that I do think that becoming, to your point, an AI strategist within a department, marketing, communications, is highly valuable. It allows you to move up and out. Like the old career path up and out of content marketing was to become the analytics guru, right? I understand content marketing analytics.
Or the
figure out a go-to-market analytics. Yeah.
You kind of move
the past 5 years, 10 years, analytics, right?
All these analytics, of course, is where the action is, assuming you have a head for numbers, which I don't. But
right. But I don't think you have to have a head for numbers to be an AI expert. I think you just have to be able to see redundancy and opportunity to put people at work in places where they can be more strategic and creative, particularly in the marketing department. How can I maximize everybody's ability to be more creative and valuable in that sense and empower them to do it? Because that's what we love to do anyway, right? That's what AI can help people do. And if you can become that person that makes your organization more successful and your people more successful using these tools, man, I'll tell you what, you're not going to be a marketing log. You're going to be doing it for everybody.
Absolutely. Shall we move on to our brainer and no brainer for the week, my friend?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, see, I've kind of left myself owner. Open owner. I'll take the brainer. As I'm kind of thinking back across the episode, though, I almost feel like I could have a dozen brainers. But I think if there is one thing that I would call out that's a little bit different from the kinds of things we touch on in a lot of our shows around, kind of career path and creativity and, will AI take your job or not take your job and all that stuff that's kind of surrounded us. To me, if there's one thing that jumps out at this as a no-brainer for any marketer listening, it's you've got to think about and check out plugins, because if other marketers are sleeping on that and you have an opportunity to use that as the tip of the spear to get your organization thinking more strategically about the role AI can play in your marketing program, then now is the exact time to do that. So if there's a brainer, that's what I've got. It's, check out what's happening in plugins and think about how you can use that particular tactic to advance your organization's stance in generative AI.
Love it. My no-brainer is if you want your ideas out there in the marketplace and propagated, let them scrape it. I mean, come on, man. Are we marketing here or are we ethicists? Because if we're marketers, we're going to be scraped. If we're ethicists, we're going to fight the good fight and then let our competitors be scraped.
All right. Scrape or be scraped, my friend.
What a choice.
I know. Let's scrape on out.
Sweet. Thank you again, my friend. I can't wait for our next episode.
I feel the same way, but hopefully I'll be more coherent next time.
Yes. And if you like our stuff, coherent or not, make sure to give us a like and share this podcast with your friends. We appreciate you. Please send us emails, particularly the ones which say we're number 6. But next time, make us number 4. See ya.